How can you turn a blog post into a video? That's a question I asked myself multiple times. Here is what I, until now, came up with. The following. I screen record my phone and therefore read the blog post on my phone as I am screen recording my phone, and also I'm using an external mic in order to record the sound. What this results in is you basically reading along with me the blog post. The question is just, is this the best format? Another alternative now would be to just learn it all and to remember it and then to make a video like this about it where I speak freely. The main problem is that, of course, that is not the same. So if you already spent the time into writing something that is written kind of good and also has maybe many iterations, so many improvements, and therefore is potentially better than the actual speaking part. Of course, this depends on the person. Some people might be better at writing, some people might be better at speaking. But what I'm trying to say is, if you already, you as a person, have put in the time in order to write something, which takes more time, at least in my experience, then it would make sense to read it word by word and not to inflate it with random words you put in. I tried this already. I tried reading it and then adding comment. The main problem with this approach is that it is not replicable. Just like a normal video is also not replicable, but I wanted to have a standardized experience basically. I wanted to have the video file that I only would create once and that I could approximate to the ideal. So if I had written something on my phone and I now wanted to record, ideally I would have kind of a standard template. And if I now add comment to this, this leaves the question whether I can repeat this process. And if I, for example, record something and then I don't have the audio, then the next time it will be different. And it also, the question of not decision fatigue, but the question arises, at which point do you stop with commenting? So how much commenting is enough? Do you add a few sentences to something that is unclear? Do you explain the entire universe? And in between you have to find, in between this spectrum, you have to find either, of course, not either, but you of course have to find how knowledgeable you even are about the whole universe, probably not so much, and how much you just don't want to add additional comment. So in the beginning, I read these comments. Not these comments, but I commented onto the thing that I actually wrote in order to explain it further. But I then eventually standardized the format and just read what is actually on the screen. But with another addition. So what you sometimes have, if this is like your blog post, then you have text and then you have a picture or a graph. And if you now don't reference the graph, then this has also a potential downside for everybody who just listens, because this intentionally or initially was intended as a podcast. So basically, I would make a high quality podcast by writing everything down. So compared to me speaking, this would be higher of quality, and I also could concentrate on speaking more, even though that might sound more artificial than me just normally speaking, which I realized down the line. But now, here is again the problem with pictures. If you have pictures on screen, you actually want to include some description for the people who just listen, because otherwise it becomes very difficult. Also, if you reference something that is on screen, such as this here, this here, this here, then nobody knows what you're talking about if they just are listening, because they obviously cannot see the thing. So they cannot see you in a video, and they also cannot see the blog post. So audio only has its limitations. That's what I'm trying to say. But if you still want to convert it into a podcast, you can now either do the following. With video, so if you record normal video and you try to convert it into a podcast, then what you can do is either convert all the video with the limitations of sometimes, okay, this is on screen, this is on screen, this is on screen, and you cannot just see it. And this creates frustration, I guess, in the people who just listen. Now, on the other side, what you could do is you could sort through all of the videos, including now the blog post videos, and basically only post the ones, copy-paste the videos to your podcast host, or make it available as audio where there is no visual information. What you also could do is whenever you're recording video, you could potentially just make the video in a way such as it is already explained for listeners. What podcasters, for example, all around the world do is they just talk about the thing for basically the audience that only is listening. So for the audience that only is listening, I just pulled up a picture of this person. could be something you want to add. The problem with this is it takes away speed, it takes away cadence, and so on and so forth, especially when writing, and especially when writing in a certain style. So now, for me, the question now arises what I actually should do. This is actually a problem I have to solve now in real time, because I actually have to decide what I want to do. In the past, as I said, I recorded these now standardized videos from the blog posts. Another problem I discovered is that it just takes a lot of time to write blog posts, and I could potentially in the same time make maybe 5 times the content in terms of video. And if you are writing on a daily basis, for example, writing becomes easier. But if you're speaking on a daily basis additionally, then speaking might become easier. So therefore, the conversion of the thing that is in your head to something that is in some form or another being consumable by somebody else, then video in total might be the better option. So for this reason, I basically deviated from my approach from writing an hour a day in order to maybe finish a blog post a day, which I almost never reached. But so in the last months, I probably wrote like 5 blog posts. Now, a blog post has its advantages, and it also has the advantage of potentially offering a higher quality version. It is basically a script. It is basically a script you could turn into a video. And now, if you have a blog post with images in between, what you ideally now could do is you could just take a video editor and just read the script and maybe make also the video without the additional enhancements such as images and so on available or not, depends on you. But of course, you would then create a duplicate if you posted 2 of the same video basically to a given platform. The one where you just speak raw, basically, and the other one where you would have enhanced video, maybe also with music. So this is something I wanted to try. I wanted to try adding music, adding maybe also different other things, and obviously also adding images. Now, there's a big problem, and this big problem is copyright. Of course, there are differences in copyright, but I think it is kind of on the safer side, even though the whole creator industry is currently not really actually totally legal with copyright, I would guess. But it is more on the gray side usually, because if you reference something like a study, for example, of course, the initial creator of the study, or the one who wrote the study, or the one who wrote the paper kind of has the copyright on the graphs. But if you now want to reference this, maybe in the public domain, and when it comes to science, maybe there is a more liberal approach to sharing. But if you just take a picture of a person, for example, that is actually where the right lies by the photographer, then if you take this picture, you're basically hurting the photographer's rights, because this photographer otherwise would have earned royalties. So now the problem that arises if you link pictures in your blog post, then you can potentially just embed it, which is different from linking. It's not different from linking, but it's different from using normal images. So normal images, if you use them and download them, then you're basically hurting copyright. But if you're just referencing and pointing towards a different website, for example, then it is a little bit more on the safer side, I would argue. So now when it comes to transforming a blog post into something that is video, the question arises, should you just use images? The images you also used in the blog post. So the idea arose in me, what if I just take the blog posts and turn these into edited videos? Edited videos I actually wanted to create anyway. The only reason I constantly talk on camera like this is because I can probably produce 10 times as much things I want to state. So if I can make one video that is edited, I could also create 10 videos. And by creating the 10 videos where I just speak, I become better at speaking. Whereas if I create the one video, then I only become better at writing and also editing. But the one thing I think that helps me the most and will help me the most in the long term is the ability to create engaging communication, basically. Not instantly, but the better I am at communicating the ideas that I want to communicate, the better it probably helps me in the long term, and the easier it also is in the long term, and the more sustainable it is. I can turn out a video like this in 10 minutes if I have 10 minutes, provided I have the setup before and after, and also provided I have the idea. And usually what works for me is that I don't make up ideas, but the ideas are already in my head. So therefore the process of recording a video, like this here, is only recording the thing that is already in my head and maybe documenting a decision process I'm currently going through, even though I haven't made a decision yet. I'm basically just discussing this more or less publicly, and also in order for myself to just document this decision. So now the question arises, if you want to also kind of be a little bit on the safer side in terms of copyright. As an example, I've written a review about a series, about a TV series. Now the question is, what can I do in order to transform this, convert this into an engaging video? Ideally, I would just take the script, read it in the best speaker voice I have, and then I would add visuals. And the visuals ideally would be actual scenes from the movie. Now, depending on the copyright now, on which side of the copyright you are on, basically. So what you can do in almost every country on this earth is use a quotation law, basically. So this quotation law in most countries states that you can use something if it kind of transforms the original content in some way, and you're not basing your piece of content on the other piece of content, but you are adding something to it. This could be comment, this could be criticism, and so on and so forth. So if you have seen any of the channels that use footage from actual films, like cinema films, and also TV series all the time, maybe also just basically as stock footage, like Jake Tran, like Charisma on Command, for example. These people use video footage often kind of as stock footage, and this is probably something that is in the long term not sustainable. I mean, of course it could also be seen as an ad for a movie, but if Jake Tran makes, for example, something about the most evil business in the world, then potentially the original creator of this content, of this video material, doesn't want this to be associated with the other kinds of content, because this would pave the way for all of the different kinds of associations you possibly want to do with this. You possibly could create with this. So for this reason, I kind of made the decision for myself to not include at least films, TV series, and so on and so forth. So the only safe use actually is if you actually buy properly the footage. So this could mean someone lives in Norway and takes either a few pictures of ice, or somebody ice bathing, or just of the mountains, or just takes slow-mo video footage of the mountains, or drone footage. So now, because this person wants to make a living, they actually upload the footage to a stock distributor, which is kind of the name for this. It's called stock footage, or stock images, or stock audio. And what this basically is think of it as a giant shop where then everybody can go in and buy these licenses. So licenses to the rights of this footage, for example, this media, and they can use it and therefore then use it for free, basically not for free, but royalty free, so to speak. So they buy basically licenses and then they use it. You might have already heard about Epidemic Sound, for example, which is also something similar, just for sound and also for kind of more popular music, whereas classic stock music you find on stock sites is often more on the lame side, I would say. So now, what you could do potentially is you could make a review about a popular TV series, and then you could add stock footage of Norway. Or if you want to make a video about the Joker and Batman, then you could add some reenactment of Batman that probably is also a copyright infringement, because maybe there is some trademark for the mask of Batman, or for how it all looks, and so on and so forth. So you have the problem that nobody will be interested in this, because it is not the actual real thing. So therefore, the better option might be to just leave it out altogether, because you probably won't find good stock footage of the newest Batman movie, because it is just licensed and there is no good stock footage of Batman, I guess. So now, this leaves you with the only option, which is also in terms of copyright on the little bit safer side, of using the images. And now, when using stills, for example, from TV series, again, it is kind of a problem, because these stills are also copyrighted. A video is nothing else than 24 frames a second, so 24 images in a single second. So therefore, when you're using one of these images, these are still copyrighted images, even though the whole thing is kind of a video or a film or a series or a movie. So, but I think it is more tolerated, and it also is more tolerated if you then use this image and zoom in and zoom out of this image, for example, or do something to the actual static image within the video editor. So this would be the pathway. Now, this would open the pathway of writing scripts. So imagine Christopher Nolan, for example, would make a movie and he would want to use this process. Then he would first write the script. He could publish the script either later on or already onto his blog. This would be his blog post. And in there, he would have outlined basically the whole movie. And of course, this would be the script for the movie, but it would also be simultaneously a blog post. So therefore, he already created a visual media, which could be published in a magazine or also on the blog, which is just a digital form of a magazine or a newspaper, I guess. So now he could publish this on the blog. What he also could do is he could transform the script already by reading it into an audio version. But there is not really a need for the audio version since it doesn't really make sense if he has the intent to make something better of this anyway with different actors, for example, who then speak and also play the different roles. So therefore the next step would be to make this actual thing. And this actual thing, when it now comes back to the leaner side of content creation, not Christopher Nolan style, would be to record a video. And this video now is either just the bare bones, the audio basically, for the video. So there are a few different options. I think you can a few different routes you can now take. The first one is to create basically an A footage of you speaking. And now the question already is, what is the A footage? Is the A footage you screen recording on the phone and then you have the audio already in the video? Probably not that good. Better would be if you recorded just yourself speaking. So therefore you would maybe have 10 minutes of video, which is you speaking. So whenever you now have an image, you can just overlay the image. But whenever you don't have an image, you still have kind of engaging things because you are actually speaking to the camera. Which leaves the question, how do you want to screen record? Or how do you want to turn the script into something that is a video? Because now you have the problem of eyesight. If I read this here, then I'm reading down here, for example, and you are obviously realizing that I'm not really looking directly into the screen. I think the same is true for teleprompters. Now, teleprompters work in a few instances better than in other instances. I think it makes sense to move further away from the camera because the eyesight actually diverges. So if you think of here the camera and here I'm I. If I am here and I have a certain angle that I look off basically, then this angle basically doesn't even hit the camera. If I have the same angle here, of course it's the same, but I don't now, so if I'm here and I look up here, for example, with the camera being here and maybe the thing I want to read up here, then of course there is a slight distance in between those two. But this distance becomes smaller, at least it doesn't become smaller, but because distance becomes bigger, now the eye has to only adjust this much, whereas here it has to adjust this much. So therefore the eyesight is off more the closer you are to the camera, and therefore also more noticeable the closer you are to the camera. If I, for example, am here and I'm reading on screen and then I'm looking into the camera and reading on screen into the camera, I'm actually looking at myself all the time on video, which is kind of what I would be looking at if I would look here, I guess. So this is kind of, I don't know if it works the best, but this is what kind of works for me because I'm basically speaking to myself. And also the problem on the S10 is, on the Galaxy S10, my phone I'm using, is that the camera is here and not in the middle, so therefore this also throws off the eyesight. So there are teleprompter apps which would offer that it can actually import the text into the teleprompter app and then you would have it on screen. But then what would happen is, I can show it to you with the eyesight, is that you would read it on screen like this. And if I'm recording like this, and I don't record like with zoom out, so the thing I'm doing is I'm recording on the Galaxy S10 here. Of course you could use a different lens and a different camera and so on and so forth, but if you still want to record on your phone, which has the main benefit that then all your video files are kind of the same, at least for me, then you have the problem, the farther away from the camera you move, obviously the more difficult it is to read on a very small screen. So what you instead could do potentially is you could move to a bigger setup with a monitor actually, and then also a camera, which then is a lot more complicated and kind of removes the simplicity out of this whole workflow I created. Therefore, another option potentially would be to make it obvious that you are not that you are reading. And you could make this a few ways. For example, what I could do very easily is I could just turn the mic here, and I could also turn this here. And then what I could do is instead of speaking directly into the camera, I just make it obvious that I read, which is also something many streamers, for example, do. So I could have the text up here, for example, and then what I would do is I would just read here, and you could still see me, and it would be somewhat visually engaging, but it's also apparent that I'm actually reading. So I'm either reading or I'm directed at you. And this also, I think, makes partially sense, because that's also how we, I think, interact to a certain extent. So if we talk to people, we also look off to the distance or to some other source, for example, for information, and then we look back to the audience. And the same is true for speakers. So the workflow or the communication that is directly to the camera all the time, directly to the audience all the time, is actually not something that is too common, I would say, in everyday life. If somebody looks at you all the time, like on camera, this is actually not really a natural way of conversation, because most people tend to break eyesight every now and then. And I would argue that people hold eyesight actually less than they actually do in terms of time percentages, at least from what I just am guessing right now. So therefore, what this would open up is you wouldn't have to read it on your phone screen. So you could just pull it up on your computer or your screen, and then you could just read it. And then you would maybe just create basically the A roll. And in the future, if you want to turn this into video, it would be as easy as taking this A roll and then overlaying images, and then you would create basically a better video. If you then, so the better you then are at speaking, the less editing you actually have to do in order to turn this into like a proper YouTube video essay, for example, for movie reviews. And this might be a workflow I will actually try, because what this also allows me to do is kind of to merge my formats currently. What I currently have is this format of me basically talking without a script. I sometimes do have notes, which of course is in the spectrum of completely free to completely scripted, in between already a little bit. But I just figured that in some topics it just makes sense to have a Wikipedia article, for example, which you look up, or certain words you want to look up. And therefore the quality of the overall video, even though you now have external sources, and it also is obvious that you now have external sources, is actually a little bit upend, you could say, because there are now external sources, and the more references you have for the thesis you want to put out, the better it probably is to some extent, at least for the purpose of not really authenticity, but just for the purpose of being kind of a good journalist, even though you could argue that many videos on the internet, and also many of my videos, obviously aren't journalistic. But at least that's what I'm trying to approximate, maybe also in the future. Now, the problem with this part is that without video editing, you don't have images. So if you put in all the work already and you have your blog post, which has then a lot of images, so I could actually just pull up a blog post, for example, which I already wrote as an example. I just actually pulled up a different article because I don't want to limit the channel, for example. Not for example, but I don't want to specify the channel already for this, because I might have to reconsider whether this goes on the creating channel or the channel that is more targeted toward business of the creator economy, you could say. So here we have a blog post. And now the question is, so the text is obvious. You just read the text. What happens now if you have an image? If you have an image, do you read the description, for example? Do you describe the image? Which eventually leads you maybe toward just then again commenting on the thing that is there, and also describing it, which makes it a less engaging video, because the people who see the whole thing obviously see it, and for them it's obvious, and therefore it's boring for them. So if you then just skip the whole thing, of course you are taking out content. But I think it would make sense to write now in a way, so to change your writing in a way that it is basically consumable in both formats. So either as a blog post with the added visual information, but the visual information is not necessary and also not referenced ideally, or not that much, in the writing. So instead of saying in this graph up here you can see that the biological age is this and the other age is this, you could just not mention the graph and just talk about the graph or write about the graph as if it is there already, kind of. So this would be a partial solution, I think. Now, regarding merging my formats. In the beginning, I thought I would just create short videos as shorts, so 0 to 60 seconds usually, because that seemed to be the evolving standard, or the standard that actually seemed to kind of evolve on all platforms because they just copied each other. So short videos in 9:16 in this format actually, which is portrait, also called vertical video. So then for the long videos, I figured maybe the whole industry will switch to a phone consumption format anyway. So this means that everybody who holds the phone this way will eventually just consume content, or would prefer consuming content this way. And then the question is, what is the difference between a short and a long? It's just the length. So therefore I would have the main format that is defined by length, a short and a long video. The other format then would be the blog post. The blog post is then defined not by the length, but usually it is also longer than a short. If you translate basically what is written and what is said in 60 seconds to a blog post, then the short version of a blog post would be a Twitter, so a tweet, or a Facebook post, and the long version would be a blog post. So this means you now have also, if you just want to write, so if you have basically the option to choose your format. Do you want to write or do you want to speak? If you want to speak, don't just record audio, because then what you also could potentially do is record video. And if you don't want to hide your face and be anonymous and just have your voice as the audio, then, I mean, if you just want to be totally anonymous, then you could go all the way and just write instead. But if you are already recording audio, then you might as well record video and have the audio set up as a copy of the video. So therefore, the format that is then the blog post as a video would be the blog post read in some way. And of course, this now is again looping back to the beginning. How should we convert a blog post into a video? And this would be basically the third format as the blog post in some way or another. And the fourth format I actually thought about is a show where you would interview people. So you would have your normal persona on a channel, for example, and you would speak about topics. And if then it would make sense to bring an expert on, it basically is a show, because it is what a podcast basically is, or a show basically is, you interviewing people. I just think there is a problem with the algorithms and what you actually want on one channel. So ideally, I think the content on one channel should be fairly similar. Over time, this might change, not the similarity might not change, but the content of a channel or the interests, the focus of a channel might slightly deviate, I would say. But in order for one thing to be something people can return back to, and also the algorithms can return back to, I think it makes sense to have it kind of similar. So therefore, whenever I see as a consumer that a person, for example, posts a 2-hour video and then posts a two-minute clip, I sometimes do watch the 2-minute clip, which often is a clip out of a bigger conversation, but I then on the same channel usually don't watch the entire episodes, because you're basically competing against yourself with a clip that is the most interesting out of a 2-hour conversation. That is, of course, usually always more interesting than the 2-hour conversation itself. Therefore, I think it makes sense to already separate these into 2 channels, and not only maybe on YouTube, but also on other platforms. The main reason I didn't do this, and this also kind of ties in with the blog post, the main reason I didn't do this is because I, at this point in time, couldn't see myself managing hundreds of different email addresses and hundreds of different channels. So think about this. You have one interest, you make one channel. Then you have short video and long video, which already kind of are 2 different formats. Then ideally you would multiply the same thing across different platforms. So you maybe have YouTube as a primary platform for video. Then you also use Facebook Shorts, Facebook Video, so Facebook Long basically. Then you also use TikTok, in the future maybe TikTok Long, which is currently capped at 10 minutes. Therefore, it doesn't make sense to, at least in my eyes, copy all the videos, because in my eyes, it only makes sense to copy all the videos chronologically, because then you just have the same catalog on all of the platforms and you don't have to keep track of which content is posted where, at least to a lesser extent, you could say. So now you could also do the same for Instagram. Then you already have 3 main video platforms. The same obviously is true for blog. A blog post could also live on Medium, on Substack, and so on and so forth. So you could copy the same content across multiple platforms in order to increase traffic for one individual native post. So in order for me to then split the interests that I have into different channels because of the targeting of the audience, I already have a few channels. So now if I create the channel, then maybe a channel, but the podcast, basically a podcast version, this podcast then would also have clips, which would also then be native. And then another question arises. Out of the long form content, could you potentially clip out short form content? And this now means that if I, for example, talk about 30 minutes about something, I could just take the content and take maybe 4 minutes out of this, and this would maybe also be something. If the video is structured in a way, you could basically post the sub-chapters of a video, or the chapters of a video, as their individual counterparts. And this would probably be more engaging, again, because it spreads the targeting again, and opens it up basically to more audience, because the audience overlap doesn't have to be the whole video, but only the certain topics you discussed. So this, and especially with shows, this means if you have a 2-hour show, you want to maybe have the main channel, which then also has main native content, original content, which is not clipped, because this again would compete against the main channel. And then you would have a clips channel that also would have long form content with maybe a 10-minute clip out of a 2-hour conversation, but also short form content. And this short form content would then be maybe 60 seconds, 30 seconds, and so on and so forth. A potential problem, obviously, is if you then want to clip out content, is the format. And for this reason, I decided to record all of my long form content in portrait, in vertical, or in 9:16. Because what this allows me to do is just clip out a clip without the need for adjusting the frame. And this is, I think, either a genius mastermind move, or it will turn out to be my downfall, because nobody watches these videos because of the format, because everybody watches YouTube on like this and also on a TV screen. But this is just a giant bet, and it also just simplifies my setup. So now, the blog post, I think it is just too much of a, as it is currently a screen recording with me doing a speaker voice and not so much a speaking voice, you could say, because I wanted to optimize the audio experience and make it more professional. Not me so much rambling about the topic, but more so much a professionally recorded thing about a certain topic that puts me in the background, where I am not the main focus of the video, such as in here. It's basically me talking about something. But in a blog post, it is less you. It is less you involved. And as Andrew Huberman stated many times, he doesn't want to be in the video, basically. He just wants to make the viewer or the audience focus on the content as much as possible, focus on the topic at hand as much as possible. And that's also at least kind of my approach. I don't want to turn myself into a public figure, but what I want to do is just put out interesting ideas. And now, if you want to convert blog posts into videos, I think it would also make sense, because of audience targeting, to now create a different channel. And currently I have it on basically the main channel, where I now have short video and long video. Now, the question now is, should I, or should you also for that matter, have the scripted content, which then would be recorded in a similar way to this, just with me looking more to the side. So if I usually look to the side maybe 10% of the video in order to reference sub-chapters and so on and so forth, or reference sources or cite Wikipedia, which I can't remember, obviously. I mean, I could potentially, but I usually can't, and maybe it's also not worth the effort of remembering whole Wikipedia articles. But what I'm trying to say is that maybe I should merge these two as a format and not have them different. Or, so this would be the one option, to have basically, to merge basically the two formats of the long video I currently have and the blog post reading, and get rid of the screen recording, which also gets rid of the images. But if I then still would want to do the images, I could take the scripted episodes and just turn them into full-blown videos. Into full-blown videos in a way where I would take the A-roll I then created, and I would basically have a copy channel where I add maybe music, and I then add the images. And then I would basically have normal YouTube videos, what you know as normal YouTube videos, because currently what I'm recording is mostly a podcast. You could say, at least the format of a podcast. It's just me speaking about a topic, usually sometimes showing images on my phone, sometimes I cannot overlay images on my phone camera, actually. It would be nice if you could. You can do it with screen recording and then switching to the camera view. Maybe screen recording in 16:9 and then switching to the camera view that crops out the image could be a potential solution, but I just haven't found a solution that makes sense. Another question is the following. If you then script the video and you read the scripted thing, should you include something like, okay, I'm now reading a script, this is basically not a normal video format? I think not, because you're taking away engagement, basically, by stating this, because you're taking away the driving force of the writing if you include something like this. It's, again, just including commentary. You should basically start right away. So possibly what I might try is, instead of, so for the next few blog posts I would potentially do, even though I kind of have already concluded that it doesn't really make sense to make blog posts, apart from you creating the blog post as a script with basically the images you want to overlay in a video, that you would start out only to then record a professionally edited video, which of course takes a lot of time compared to videos like these, which I can just create on a much higher quantity, and therefore churn basically the thing that I have in my head, or the ideas I have in my head, into something that is actually real much easier. A very good example of the strategy was a few days ago. I had the idea after listening to an interview with Julie Nolke to also record some skits, so basically me talking with myself. And due to the restrictions, I came up with this idea. What if I just take my phone and I record myself from this angle and then from this angle, in the same clothes, not changing anything, apart from me speaking maybe slightly differently. And to some extent I would say it worked, and I was able to do this. I go from idea to finally finished recorded video in 20 minutes, or maybe 10 minutes in some instances, and it's got a few hundred views already. Of course, it's not billions of views, but at least it is a concept that now is in reality, and I was able to do this. And I didn't have to edit, and I didn't have to think about why and how I want to do this then in After Effects and so on and so forth. I just, by the limitations of this format, I just created it. And the same might be true now for converting blog posts into video. What if I just have this limitation that I can only speak in real time, that I cannot edit? What could I potentially do in order to turn this into something with the lowest, of course still trying to have a high quality, but with the lowest time investment, because then I can create different things. Because every second, every minute, every hour more you put into one piece of content, you take away from producing other pieces of content that would potentially be better in the future. Not better in the future, but the more things you cover, I guess, the more things you cover. You just increase the quantity, and that's what I'm trying to do, because this gets to some extent, I think, rid of perfectionism. So what I might do for now is I probably will try in the next few, I don't know, weeks, to try this new format of me just having the camera still here and just reading on screen what I actually wrote and not describing the images. And then I will just try to post this, basically not try to post it, but I will actually post this as basically a normal long format video. This would also simplify the main formats on a channel to shorts and videos. Videos being the long videos over 60 seconds, also for me usually in 9:16, and the shorts just being the same but shorter. And therefore the only format that is actually there is length. So it is basically the same content across one channel, and the only difference in format is the length. And this would, I think, create way less confusion, because currently I have already live 2 formats or 3 formats or sometimes 4 or 5 different formats on one channel, which just is confusing to the audience. And it also is confusing to the algorithm. Imagine you posting a short, for example, historically. Now, of course, YouTube is better at separating these, but you posting a short on your main channel, Mr. Beast or MKBHD posting a short video on their main channel, it screws up their feed. And now YouTube has separated these feeds, which is something many people wished for, and I also wished for. And this is nice. And I think this now ideally would also you could use this as a chance maybe to just say, okay, there are just these different 2 formats that are defined by length, and then apply it accordingly and make one channel about one topic and in one video style maybe. Because if you switch things up too much, it just becomes less predictable. And the less predictable it is, the more you play with the expectations of the audience and the algorithm. So therefore, if I am searching up something, let's say Colin and Samir, for example. I've listened to their show and the podcast and basically their YouTube videos for a few years at this point in time. I followed them from when they basically started out with this creator who worked for Casey Neistat. And they create YouTube videos, but they also have the podcast episodes on their main channel. And I just don't like it. I don't like it as a consumer, not as business, not in any other sense. Or as creator, I see that there is a value in having just one channel. But the simplicity of one channel, I think, is a net negative in total, because you could potentially hit two different audiences, even though there might be an overlap. By separating these out, you don't have to have the overlap. Therefore, just mathematics, just statistics, you have just in total a bigger audience. Colin and Samir, for example, could have maybe a potential show where they post the full length interviews with, I don't know, 50k subscribers, maybe it's 100k subscribers, and they could have the main channel where they actually post the edited episodes, not the edited episodes, but the videos they then actually also put out. Similar maybe to Graham Stephan, now also posting creator interviews, and on the other side having his podcast where he discusses in detail, maybe with the same creator, different stuff. So I think the whole process of turning blog posts into video is not just turning blog posts into a video or using some service on the internet to turn it into a video, which probably doesn't make sense in the long term. But the whole process is, I think, defined by a lot of different variables we have to think about. Do you want to write your videos? Do you want to speak freely? What are the consequences of writing your videos in the long term? Do you want to become a better writer or become a better communicator? If you become a better communicator, then you have the ability to also create much more engaging content, because just more people are able to watch video compared to, not are able, but watch video in general, I would say, compared to you or compared to them reading the same thing as a blog post. I often find myself just not reading anything on the internet, but just going to YouTube and just searching for stuff, because you also have the visual information, even if the visual information is only the additional communication you have with your hands, with your voice, and with your mimics, and so on and so forth. So therefore, I think maybe video is just a closer approximation to reality, and therefore is just the winning format as of now, until the next format might be here. Of course, also something to think about. Writing can only be read in one-on-one time, in primary time. Video is only usually also consumed in one-on-one time, even though many people might eat while they watch a video. The video is the main thing that consumes their mind, because the other thing is automated to an extent at which they can focus their mind on something else and still eat. The same is true for maybe cycling and watching a video. It would only be viable in the gym if the whole thing is static. But if you have to pay attention to traffic, to lights, to people on the streets, then watching video and biking is not something that is that safe. But audio and biking, for example, is safe. And for this reason, I still wanted to have the additional format of audio as a format. And for this reason, I initially created the blog post as a more standardized format. And also, it allowed me to have a higher standard for myself in order to not create very crappy videos in the beginning and then realize that I'm really bad at speaking, at public speaking, or at speaking to a camera, and then maybe cancel the whole project. Instead, I focused on writing, but I still now have all of these blog posts. And well, it is just not a very good format, I think, for YouTube, because people, if you see this and you go again on my channel and the next thing you see is just a blog post where I just speak, maybe in a slightly different voice, then this is just not what you expected. And of course, I now could split these channels and I could have the blog post on a different channel, which I could do potentially. I could just private all of these videos and then just either repost them on a different channel or just turn them into full-blown videos. But then again, turning them into full-blown videos is just opportunity cost. If I take this and I overlay images and just exporting a video file that is like 20 minutes long, usually takes like 10 or 20 minutes. And then of course you also have to have the processing power. Currently, recording these videos, I don't have to have a good notebook, for example, for video editing. Of course, there are a lot of other benefits to having a good notebook, such as faster working speeds and so on and so forth. But I'm not I don't have the constraint of having to have a good notebook, a good graphics card, a good storage, because the only thing I do is transfer files from my phone to my computer and then upload them to YouTube. Instead, if you want to create something that's unedited video, then it just takes a lot of time. And maybe in the future, if this whole thing takes off, I can maybe hire an editor who then takes these videos and just overlays the images I already have in the blog post. Of course, I would have to try this on my own, but I just don't think it makes sense to use my time in this way, because, well, it's just overall, I think, a net negative. So therefore, the process of turning blog posts into videos just might be not as easy as at least I initially thought, because there are just so many different things connected to this thing. And maybe in the future I would just, this is actually the idea I had, I just use them as scripts for better videos, basically, and the inserts, the images, and maybe also the external links I can then overlay as sources and as more visually engaging material. And the best way to do this, I think, is not to have an image then for the next 2 minutes, but to just have a recorded A-roll that is very similar to this video style, where I just have obviously an external source, because I look to different parts of the video and to the camera, back, and then back to the source, and therefore it is distinguishable, and therefore it doesn't seem as if I try to deceive the audience and convince them that I can make this whole thing I am saying up in my mind, or can remember it, and am speaking freely, even though I'm actually reading from a teleprompter, which, of course, it's also nonsense to a certain extent, but it's also kind of seen, I think, often kind of as deceiving. Also, just this point where you realize that something you're actually watching, does he kind of slightly look off and do his eyes move all the time? This point where you realize that the thing you thought, this person is so intelligent, they can speak this way all the time, and then you just realize it's written and they are just basically reading to you, which is just, in terms of expectation versus reality, a little bit of letting you down, I guess. So I guess this is the current plan to go forward. I don't know, apart from spitting now, I don't know whether I should then private the videos and make a different channel for these types of videos, because I already kind of decided if I want to make a show for a specific interest, for example this interest, more on the creator business side, and interview people, then it should be a different show, because it just doesn't make sense to post it on the same channel as the video. So with the current system of how video platforms work in general, I just don't think it makes sense. And also just for the audience, if I think of myself as a proxy for how people would consume this content, I just don't wanna switch to different channels or have clips and the main podcast on the same channel.